Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this new book. This is book 3 in the Sneakyverse. 1 and 2 will be linked down below. This can also be read as a standalone book, so fear not. If at any point you enjoyed this book or this series, head over to the author's page on Reddit and show them some love and appreciation for this book. Anyways, on to the story. Sneakyverse, book 3, The Long Way Home, chapter 1, In the Belly. In an orbit around one of the 3 gas giants, in an unimportant coalition of independent planet system, a personal yacht listed and tumbled like a leaf caught on the wind. Anyone familiar with the hazards of hyperspace sea in this area would think her one of many vessels that fell prey to the colliding currents forced to drop to real space there. It had become a hotspot for pirates, corsairs, and other vultures lately on account of the high rate of hyperspace drop-in system. And that was exactly why the Long Way was doing her best imitation of a distressed rich person's vessel in a poorly maintained parking orbit. She was even squawking out the standard CIP SOS. Therefore, it was little surprise when a lurking shark of a vessel nosed out of the debris ring orbiting another of the gas giants where it had been hiding in wait for a larger prey. Greed and opportunity make such plump morsels difficult to resist for the piratically inclined. Which is why Vincent Framius grinned savagely in his hiding place when he felt the jolt of tractor beams seizing his little ship. The hunt was on. The scum just didn't know it yet. Patience sustained Vincent as he waited. He felt the strange buzzing of overlapping artificial gravity fields. He felt the jolting thump of the yacht dropping to the deck within the pirate's much larger vessel. And he felt the pressure equalize between inside his ship and what he guessed was either a shuttle or cargo bay. One could be used as the other on a lot of vessels in known space. He heard 1, 2, 5, 8 scumbags stormed the Long Way, all stomping and shouting. He could tell that at least 3 languages were being spoken by the societal refuse. But he always kept his implant turned off for this portion, so no translations were forthcoming. He didn't need to know what they were shouting. They'd be dead soon anyways. Soon the noise died down. Then he heard the pirates clomp back to their own ship outside. And still he waited. Waited, to be sure. Then he carefully triggered the switch that retracted the panel behind himself and his toolkit. He had already donned the tight-fitting suit of adaptive camo ballistic weave, so he began by taking only his son's old hunting knife and a garrote of thin steel cable. He was on a hunt, not in a battle after all. The worn leather sheath had a chance to give him away if he wasn't careful, but he simply couldn't leave either knife or sheath behind. He was always careful. He sent up a prayer to St. Michael to make him strong and swift, and began. He was a blurry of indistinct shadow, and a loading ramp descending from the belly of the Long Way as he slowly took the dilapidated shuttle bay, which had swallowed his bait. Building hoses and power cables crisscrossed the deck. A mix of modified shuttles meant for boarding and victimized vessels were haphazardly crammed wherever they'd fit. Tools, toolboxes, and rolling workbenches were scattered around at more or less random, and whatever dregs were meant to be maintaining the materials maligned elsewhere, as Vincent found himself alone. Even still, he took no chances. He slowly stepped soundlessly from his vessel and onto the hostile deck, and was mildly surprised to find it was what the rest of known space called standard gravity, but what Terrans called low G. He filed that fact away in his mind for later, and dropped to all fours and loped along like his canine ancestors who'd once hunted alongside humans on Terra herself. His humans were gone, dead and gone, however. He was still hunting while the humans were gone, dead and gone. He was able to move quickly in low G, but he still took care. Vincent slunk along the shadows cast by the shuttle, with the prow modified for ramming and boarding towards one smaller bulkhead doors away from the closed blast doors in the bay's outer hull. The bulkheads were closer, and still the bay was empty. Empty, save for a single shadow of vengeance that flitted from the rolling bench to shuttle, to shadowed corner until he was through the bulkhead and into the disused maintenance access corridor. Even behind all of the shoddy patch jobs and questionable decorative choices, he could recognize the making of the vessel, and he had a rough idea of where to find the crew quarters. Meanwhile, deep within the pirate vessel, Jason George groaned as his head swam in protest when he struggled to sit up. The last thing he remembered, he'd found a stowaway, and was dragging a squawking kid to his auntie, Captain Viridra, with little Trendre along as usual. But something had collided with the hearts longed to be brought close, and over a dozen strangers swarmed up the corridor. They'd shot him with the sonic stunners, but that had frankly just made him mad. and he knew what to do about pirates. He fought. He thought he remembered doing pretty well, considering that he was only 11 up against grown men, even if most of them were light worlders. Then he remembered pain, then blackness. Despite the swelling of his face, he forced his eyes open. He needed to see his situation. That situation didn't tell him much. First off, he was obviously no longer aboard the Hearts long to be brought close, judging from the unfamiliar and unclean walls. This wasn't even a Star Sailor vessel, so far as he could tell anyway. He was in a room most non-Terrans would consider small, but he figured it was spacious enough for himself and 3 other kids there. Little Trendre was there, and the stowaway too, but there was also one of the passenger kids, a Luttre kid, on her way to visit family on Woat, if he remembered correctly, named Vi. Also, if he remembered correctly, there wasn't any furniture, unless one counted the berth set into the wall to the right of the door, and the combined toilet and shower in the corner, and the door was shut. He groaned again as little Trendre threw all 4 of her arms around him in a hug that didn't feel too comfortable on his bruised ribs. She loosed up. He started by saying in seafarer's negotiation, "Did anybody try the door?" "No," said the stowaway, and Jason took a longer, more careful look at the blue-plumed Corvian boy. His clothes were threadbare. He looked somewhat lean, even for one of the avian races, and his feathers seemed puffed out, as if he was trying to make himself look bigger. He was terrified. "Did anything happen while I was about?" "Not really," little Trendre mumbled into his shirt. "The bad guys just tossed us in here, and I heard the hyperdrive spool up twice." Jason looked towards Vi and saw that she was just looking in confusion, and he tried to remember where she was from. He thought he remembered, so he asked in commercial English. "Republic?" "Yeah," she answered in the same language. "You got some kind of fancy implant that lets you speak other languages?" "Nah," he said as he tried to roll a little stiffness out of his neck. "I speak commercial English, seafaring negotiation, New Cajun, and a little official English and Jakuvish." "Why?" she asked as her rounded ears flicked towards him. Jason figured that she was trying to distract herself from the situation. "Because I'm going to be a lost boy one day, and I have to get an implant removed anyway," Jason told her with absolute certainty that he tried to roll his shoulders with his cousin's tight embrace. "Oh," she said, as she snapped her rubber tail against the deck nervously and said, "I didn't notice that aboard about you. So, what's got everyone so nervous?" he asked, this in commercial English. Jason suppressed a pained grunt as his cousin's hug got tighter, and the stowaway surprised him by answering the same language. "After they tased you, they beat and kicked you, and told us that if we got any ideas, we'd get the same." Elsewhere in the ship, a pirate desperately clawed at his own throat as a steel cable dug into his flesh under his fur as Vincent put his knees on the shoulders and drew the garrote ever tighter. The waste of oxygen thrashed under Vincent's dense Terran weight with desperate terror, and the pirate hunter himself felt only a mild indecision. Did he leave the corpse in the corridor to be discovered, or dispose of it? The pirate began to clumsily slap at his neck. If he left it to be discovered, it would unsettle the remaining pirates, but he still didn't have a full count. He decided that he'd lug the big lump of fur into an airlock and cycle it. The living garbage became normal, still garbage. The first corpse should cause infighting. He'd learned that lesson many pirate ships ago. Once he'd sent the scum's corpse into the void, he heard a slight change in the background noise of the ship. He guessed that they'd translated into hyperspace. It wouldn't matter much. Wherever they were headed, they wouldn't live long enough for it to matter. He crept inside an access tube that housed the utilities for living quarters, power, water, septic, etc., and made sure to take note of the breaker boxes and shut-off valves. Then he poked his nose into the main corridor of the quarters deck to test the air for sense. There were Terrans aboard, which wasn't that strange for pirates in the CIP. Not just strange for pirates, but this taking people business was new. He even heard that they'd attacked Star Sailor ships, which was the same thing as attacking the Republican ship to the Republic, and the Republic of Terra and her aligned planets wouldn't care about what border the pirates were hiding behind. Vincent put such cheerful thoughts out of his mind as he tested the air again. Terrans, at least 2 humans, 2 doggos, and a big kitty. And for the Xenos, he had a harder time picking them out. He was pretty sure that he could smell the reptilian signs, fur and dander, but that might have been from a giant teddy bear person that he just sent to the void, and possibly Star Sailors. Then he peeked into the first cabin. It was a sty of a room. Processed food wrappers littered the floor, and every flat surface, stained clothes were strewn all about the place. The berth was more of filth-encrusted nest, and the less said about the smell, the better. He backed away to check a different cabin. Luckily, this one smelled better, even if it didn't look much better. It had a reptilian feel to it. and was decorated into a decidedly terrible way, down to several enormous body pillows in the berth. Vincent tried not to think about these pillows too deeply, and cast his eyes around the rest of the room for anything useful. There was an oasis of neat tidiness on a shelf by the door, where a fancy ceremonial dagger rested on an ornate stand. He took it immediately. Meanwhile, Jason gently peeled Trandre off himself so that he could stand up and stretch the ache out of his everything. His young joints cracked a little, and he sighed with relief before he said, "We're on a passenger liner or an all-decommissioned military vessel." "How do you know that?" the stowaway scoffed as he flapped his wings in what he had probably thought was a disdainful shrug. "Brig," Trandre said. "A long or short hauler or trader doesn't need a brig." "Huh?" the stowaway asked. Jason thought his feathers were laying slightly more flat atop his head. Good. He was calming down. "Think about it," Jason said. "Haulers and traders have crews that all know each other. They all live together for weeks at a time. And that's if they're not just spacers like Star Sailors or the various Republic traders or CRP guilders. So if there's ever a bad dispute, they can just be confined to quarters and maybe kicked off at the next stop. Passenger liners are different, though, since strangers come aboard." "Oh," Vi said brightly. "So if someone commits a crime or something, and they're not a crew, the ship would need somewhere to hold them until they can be handed over to the cops." "Aye," Jason said, as he twisted his spine. He was feeling slightly less stiff. "Military ships might take enemy prisoners, or a crewman might do something super crazy, so they need brigs too." "So, how does that help us?" the stowaway sneered. "I never got your name, by the way," Jason replied obliquely. "I'm Jason." The stowaway made a series of throaty clicks and snaps of his beak in reply. "You know there is no way in God's stars that I can pronounce that. Not me, nor any of us. And I reckon we're stuck together for a spell." "It translates to, yet another has come into the world," the stowaway muttered as he turned his black eyes away from anybody in the room with him. "That's not a very good name," Vi said as she curled her thick rubber tail in front of her chest and hugged it while she gave yet another has come into the world a piteous glance. "For now, I'm just going to call you Stowaway," Jason said as he stepped up to the door, towering over him. It looked like the Corvian was going to angrily object, so Jason said, "At least you decided to be a stowaway." Stowaway's beak snapped shut, and he blinked at Jason slowly before nodding. "Aren't you afraid?" Vi asked suddenly. I'm super afraid." There was a sleepage pile in refuse in one of the cabins across the deck, littered with empty beer cans and liquor bottles. Vincent tested the air and smelled human. Perfect. He crept forward, and his foot nudged a bottle on the deck. Liquid sloshed within. So he stooped over to pick up and continued towards the slumbering criminal who believed himself safe in his own berth. Without hesitation, he plunged the stolen dagger into the sleeping form and watched as the man struggled to draw breath as the blade sunk into his lung. The human refuse coughed and choked on his own blood while Vincent pulled the cork out of the bottle with a bass drum and took a long pull from the liquor inside. Cheap gin. It was alcohol. He watched the terror slowly fade from the pirate's eyes as he swirled the gin around. Then he took another long pull before he dashed the bottle against the shelf by the belt and placed the bottle's neck in the corpse's cooling grasp. Hopefully, someone had heard the shattering glass. He hoped that one of the doggos aboard had considered the garbage to be his human. Swiftly and silently, Vincent returned to the maintenance spaces and began moving towards the fore of the ship. His next stop would be the galley. He touched the worn deer horn scales with his son's hunting knife as he slunk like a stout through the tunnel designed for a much larger race than any Terran. Still, he took no chances. The galley was kept in surprisingly good order, especially considering the state of the rest of the ship. And he saw that he was right. One of the very few Star Sailor criminal scum who had escaped the fleets of Own Reeves and Justicals to indulge in a hateful and base life of plunder and villainy was there, taking a long pull from 2-liter bottle of cola. He bared his fangs in a grimly satisfied wolf smile at the knowledge that the Xeno was likely drunk off his arse. He was just an odd shadow cast by failing lights overhead as he ever slowly crept toward the patched and worn dinette where the scum fell ever deeper into his cups. He still found a little funny that most Xenos got drunk off caffeine. Closer and closer he crept until he was under the table. The antler scales felt natural in his hand, as natural as the day he carved them. The steel gleamed as the light flickered, but there was nobody who could see it. He didn't know what it was called on the Star Sailor's leg, but he knew it as the hamstring. The steel bit bitterly, the pirate cried out, and Vincent drew back into the darkness beneath one of the bench seats as the drunken pirate fell to the deck in a panic. Wordless cries of distress drunkenly deluged from the doomed delinquent as he struggled to stand. Vincent didn't care. He rose from the shadow like a wraith of vengeance from the shadows, and while comparatively small, stooped over the third crippled victim. The bitter blade bit into the crop corsier's spine. He spasmed once and lay still. And Vincent cleaned the filth from his son's old hunting knife. All that noise was bound to bring attention, so he retreated to the maintenance spaces to let Lion wait. "What makes you think that you're going to be a lost boy anyway?" Stowaway asked. "And how does knowing we're going to bring help us?" "It's always better to know more. That's what my dad says," Jason said as he carefully inspected the cell. "And what would your dad know about being captured by pirates?" Stowaway scoffed. Jason put a hand on little Trundre's shoulder to keep her from blurting out his dad's nickname to shut Stowaway up. It was pretty clear to Jason that the guy was trying to act tough since this situation was so frightening, but he reckoned that the talk was keeping the guy at least calmish. He considered just telling him his father's name. He'd probably recognize it, or the more famous nickname, but he thought that maybe the pirates would be listening. His dad also said that it was always better to make sure the enemy knew less than you, so he said, "He's an officer in the R&I. He knows a lot of stuff about fighting and strategy and things." "Oh, do you think he'll come for us?" Vi asked hopefully. "You'd have to know where we are first," Jason said slowly. "That good that does us then," Stowaway sneered. "You'll keep a civil tongue if you like your wings the way they are," Jason snapped almost absently as his mind churned. "They took us, then ran, which means what? Hostages for ransom, maybe. But even the dumbest pirate should know how that turns out when you take Republican civilians." "All Star Sailors," little Trandry said as she pressed up against Jason's back. Her lower left hand pounded Jason's right hand. "Oh, and how does that turn out?" Stowaway asked, forgetting for a moment to pretend dismissive indifference. "Everyone knows that," Vi said brightly. "The pirates all get killed or arrested." "Aye," Jason agreed. "But Uncle Geronron was right there. And did anyone see what happened to him?" His fellows all shook their heads somberly, so he changed back slightly. "And I fought back." He looked down at his split knuckles. "But they just beat me instead of killing me, or leaving me behind." "What could that mean, though?" Stowaway asked. "That they want us alive," Vi interjected. "Aye, but I can't figure on why." Vincent had been correct. A cluster of living garbage soon formed around the cooling corpse, 10 of them. Counting the 3 he disposed of already, that brought the total to the baker's dozen, and left only 3 missing by the number of occupied cabins in the quarters. It was likely that pirates who preyed on those who dropped from hyperspace by their own incompliant navigations had the sense to man the bridge while in hyperspace, so at least one of the missing crew was likely there. They were gesticulating wildly, shouting or hissing, or bellowing loudly. Vincent didn't bother switching on his implant. He didn't care what they were saying. Besides, his implant would likely connect to the ship's network and give his presence away. Amongst those hotly debated of cooling corpse in the drying puddle of its own blood were one of the centaur minotaur lizard people, a couple more giant teddy bear people, and the rest of giant gecko people, all lightworlders. He was wondering where the other Terrans were when the pair of doggos flanking the big kitty he'd scanned earlier. The doggos were armed with pistols, and the big kitty clutched a blood-stained ceremonial dagger in his fist. The trio looked at the dead Star Sailor and came to some conclusion. The big kitty pirate's fur stood on end as he lunged with the dagger with a startling speed, and the rest of the crew were startled to see the centaur monitor lizard person, blood splashing across the deck as the big kitty brought his claws to bear in a savage mauling. The crew quickly picked sides, and those who made the draw on the Terran trio found ferrous material magnetically accelerated through their soft tissue, along with some of those who failed to get out of the way, which left the trio and 2 of the pirates still alive. The big kitty spat on the ribboned enemies and the innocent victim of his swift justice and said something in what was probably Low German. The surviving non-Terrans began dragging out the corpses of what they thought were traitors out of the galley, leaving long shameful smeared trails of blood while the trio tended to the remains of the Star Sailor that Vincent had dispatched earlier. Vincent allowed himself a grin of grim delight at the deception coming to fruition. It was always easy to turn murderers' dregs against one another. "Does it matter why?" little Trandre asked softly. "Maybe, I don't know. If we knew the reason they took us, we might get some leverage, maybe." "I still want to know how you think you're going to get into the Lost Boys," Stowaway said, and Jason noticed that he forgot to keep up his sneer halfway through the sentence. "Oh, it's just a family tradition. I have to get in, or else everyone will be mad at me, or I can pick a different service, and everyone will only make fun of me a little." "Huh? I'll tell you all about it when we get out of here," Jason said, his eyes still searching. "You mean if we get out of here?" "No, I don't." The trio of treacherous Terran terrors trooped towards their ship's nerve center, towards the bridge, unaware that they gained an additional shadow. They turned the corner, and 3 became 2 as Vincent pulled his garrote tight around the doggo's throat. He reached out in desperate terror towards his comrades in depravity, but he could do nothing against Vincent's strength and leverage as he was dragged backwards into the swallowing darkness. He clawed at the steel encircling his throat. He kicked at the man at his back, but Vincent only continued to drag him to his doom. Vincent waited for his latest victim to stir and stand before he tapped at the control panel to begin decompression within the airlock where the pirate stood. He watched with cold eyes as the doggo realized what was happening and began to pound at the viewport in futile desperation. He watched with cold eyes as he began to gasp for breath. He watched with cold eyes as the filth slid to the deck and reached up with a struggling arm. He watched with cold eyes as blood ran from the pirate's eyes and ears, and he lay still forever. He melted into the shadows again. "You can't know what's going to happen," Vi said with a nervous flick of her ears. Little Chandrate pressed against Jason a little harder as he stopped looking for the safety sensors for a moment. "No, but that's what being brave is for." "I thought you said that you were super scared." "I am. I'm just not going to let that stop me from doing what's right," Jason said as he looked at the 3 younger children in turn. "What's right is me to protect you and get you out safe. So that's what's going to happen, since I'm going to make it happen." Vincent crept through the maintenance corridor towards the shuttle bay, where the long way lay in wait, and where, more importantly, there was a large enough airlock for the pirates to dispose of the corpses in one go. It was also where the rest of Vincent's arsenal was. A careful scan from the shadows revealed that the pirates were nearly finished loading said airlock with their former friends to be unceremoniously sent into the ravages of hyperspace. Vincent kept low as he crept across the bay from the shadow to shadow, and took care to keep the modified shuttles, tool chests, scattered spare parts, etc. between himself and the trudging pirates as they callously saw their grim labor until he could creep back into the long way and retrieve the surplus Republican boarding shotgun. He slunk to a shadow between the tool chest and a chunk of discarded hull plating and waited. They stood together to briefly find respite from their labor, and Vincent sent a burst of thousands of tiny magnetically accelerated flechettes through each of them. The 2 new corpses tumbled from top of the pile, and Vincent cycled the door to jettison the contents of the airlock. He didn't bother staying to watch the corpses collide with the edges of the bubble of real space and be atomized by the ravages of the hyperspace sea. 4 left. He found all 4 of them conveniently in the ship's run-down bridge. He had found them conveniently deep in discussion about something. He didn't care what. He was there to clean the scum from the stars, so he opened fire and didn't stop until 4 pirates had been reduced to a mass of bloody pulp. He found himself panting, clenching his jaw, wanting to howl in rage-filled victory. Yet another pirate ship killed, and it still wasn't enough. It would never be enough. He glanced over the navigation station and found that the course followed the same currents that he was unlikely to result in an unplanned drop. His thumb brushed up against the deer horn scales of his son's old knife, and he remembered there was a chance. There was always a chance, no matter how long it's been or how far it's gone. Therefore, he went to the brig. All but one of the cells stood empty. He found one of the cells locked, however, and that bitter poison of hope swelled in his heart once more. He tapped away at the control panel until he could open the door. It slid aside to reveal 4 children, none of whom were his son, nor even doggos. He blinked as a pale human boy with long sanguine hair, woven into a star-setter's braid for some reason, squared up to him as if ready to fight. The kid looked somewhere between 9 and 12, and the 3 Xeno kids were either as big or bigger, and all of them stood behind him, one of whom was a star-sailor girl, her blue skin pale with terror, and she cowered in the kid's diminutive shadow. A little bit of his heart died again as she asked, "Implants?" "No," the boy said in one of the Frankish languages close to his own Quebecer. "And if you want to get to them, you're gonna have to get through me. Pirates are dead, kid. I'll help you get home." Jason raised an eyebrow at the towering doggo with killer's eyes standing over him and asked, "Why are the pirates dead?" The man answered, "Because I hunted them down." "Privateer?" "Hunter." Jason narrowed his eyes at the man and said, 3 of us are Republic, you know. Trying to get some extra ransom out of this would be a bad idea for you." Vincent was surprised by the hostility from the kid he'd gone out of his way to rescue. "Listen up, ingrate. I hunt pirates. Sometimes I find hostages and get them back home. Sometimes there's a reward. Sometimes there isn't. Then I go hunt more pirates. So if you really want, you can stay in there and wait for a more official rescuer. Or you can button up your lip and come with me." Jason lowered his fists and gave his cousin a comforting pat before he said with a gesture to the 3 baffled kids behind him, Okay, any chance you speak commercial English? Yes, he said through his thick accent. I speak it. I'm Vincent Rimus. You? This is Stowaway, Jason said, pointing to the Corvian boy. At least until we find a better name. This is Vi, and this is my cousin, Trandre Drordre. Jason ignored the incredulous looks and calling little Trandre his cousin, and continued. And my name is Jason George. Nice to meet you. Vincent added one and one in his head, came to some conclusions, and swore. Repeated, and sulphurously. Once he was done, he said bitterly, Well, I want you to make it very clear to your parents that I was not a part of this crew. Come on, let's get my ship ready. I didn't recognize where this tub was headed, so I'll wish to leave the second it translates to real space. I appreciate a hand. Aye, Jason said, with sobriety beyond his years. Let's start with getting whatever food we can. End of chapter. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Caspar Arnholt, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.